So chat to me about what we were just chatting there offline, I suppose. So moving to Vancouver and you've got involved a bit with coaching.
Yeah, so my first coaching gig, I guess gig might be a bit lofty word to use for it, but yeah, so I was planning on playing when I came out here, and just due to my body being in the condition that it's in, I wasn't able to play. And I was planning on playing with the Vancouver Rowers, who you would be very familiar with, obviously. And I got in touch with Duncan James, who's the head coach there, and said, "Look, I'm not going to be able to play, but he said we'd still be keen for you to come in and just give a hand doing bits and pieces if you were happy to do that." So yeah, decided I'd give coaching a go, and I'm enjoying it a lot. It's very different, obviously, to playing different side of the fence, I guess. Although it's probably a bit a dramatic a way to phrase it, but it is different. There's a different dynamic, different relationships with the players. I mean, ultimately, I'm doing it from a social point of view to get to know guys and everything else. And from that point of view, it's definitely succeeding, and it has succeeded. But in terms of the on pitch stuff and the rugby specific stuff, yeah, it's interesting. You have to take a different perspective on things, both in, I guess, how you present stuff and how you interact with the people around you as well. But I'm enjoying it a lot. I'm learning a lot, and I'm definitely glad that I've gone for it for sure.
Yeah. And so you mentioned there the playing. So after you finished up in Grenoble, you've played a bit since.
That's right. So I dislocated my hip in my last game in France, and that kind of coincided with when I was going to finish up anyway. So it's not like I was planning on playing after that's 2018 2019 season. So it wasn't ideal. Obviously, it's never ideal to dislocate your hip, but it wasn't like it scuppered any plans that I had to play at a high level again. Saying that, I was offered more contracts in that summer when I actually had a dislocated hip than I had been offered at any other time or any other off season before. So yeah, I guess that's the way the cookie crumbles, unfortunately. But yeah, I took a break from rugby completely for 2.5 years. I went back. I moved to Belgium kind of about a year and a bit after finishing up in France. So I moved back to Ireland for a little bit, had to finish up some studies at UL, and went to Brussels with my wife in September 2020, and I got back into playing GA over there. I had played GA all my life, as a young fella. Had played football and hurling. I'm from the countryside in Cork, so that's kind of par for the course there, as it is in many parts of rural Ireland, or every part of rural Ireland, I suppose. So yeah, I had no interest in playing rugby for a while, and then started to get the itch a little bit again, and yeah, I had just gotten back into watching rugby and kind of paying close attention to it. I was writing about it again after a little bit of a break from writing with the Examiner. And I was like, you know what? I'm young enough to do it. My hips feels okay. I'm able to play this sport, so I'll go back and see what it's like. So I played with Brussels Celtics, they're called. They'd be a third division Belgian side, so not lighting up the world of European rugby by any means, or even Belgian rugby for that matter. But it was great, and I was thrilled when I went back and was able to just enjoy the kind of atmosphere and the vibe that you have in a rugby club. I guess I'd been out of the GA for so long that it was coming into it as a newbie again almost, whereas going back to the rugby, it was very much that I felt at home again. So we had people from all over the world there, and got to play in the back row for the first time in my adult life. So got to play number 8, which is far more enjoyable and far easier on the body than playing in the front row. And yeah, I guess that was probably when I touched on the coaching a little bit. I was the only ex-pro in the club. They wouldn't get a lot of guys that have played professionally previously. And so it was nice to be able to just impart, I guess, bits and pieces of wisdom there. We had a young coaching ticket as well. It was their first time actually doing any coaching at all themselves. So they were able to lean on me a bit, and I was able to give my perspective of my time in Munster and my time in Grenoble as well. So yeah, very enjoyable experience. And unfortunately, yeah, as I said, my hip eventually gave up on me and said no more of this. So no more playing, but hopefully plenty of coaching ahead of me at least.
Yeah, good stuff. And what was it about it that you decided in that kind of 2019 that you were done with the program, or that you had had enough?
I think from my point of view, it had probably run its course at that stage, I would say, in that I had kind of, in terms of like what I was going to achieve as a professional athlete, the Munster thing had kind of come and gone, and the Ireland thing, as a result, wasn't going to be a runner anymore. Like I wasn't going to land back in Ireland and sign for one of the provinces, and then start making shapes with a view to breaking into the Irish side. That ship had sailed as far as I was concerned. So I enjoyed living in France. I enjoyed it a lot, but the rugby side of things, I just didn't enjoy as much as I used to anymore. And there was a combination of things in that, I suppose. And a big part of that was the fact that my body was just a bit shagged really at that stage. Had some bad history with injuries over the years, with kind of major injuries, but a major injury is one thing in the sense you're sidelined for a while, but you're usually able to get back to full fitness if you're being well looked after, if you take good care of yourself, and you can kind of pick up where you left off to an extent. But just a lot of niggly injuries like neck problems, back problems. My groins were giving me a lot of trouble. So just was in pain a lot of the time, really. And I felt ultimately that I wasn't able to perform at the level that I previously could. And like, that's fine. And invariably, most people that don't play test rugby over a period of time will experience that kind of slump at a certain point, or that decline in their performance at a certain point. But for me, I just didn't like the fact that I wasn't able to deliver the way that I used to be able to. So it was kind of a combination of things, Brian, really, and ultimately just led to me deciding that, look, I'm young. I'm probably young to be retiring, but ultimately stopping at this age will allow me to pursue some other things that maybe I wouldn't be able to do if I left this for another 3 or 4 years, or even 2 years, whatever it was. I just decided to bite the bullet. And while my logical brain would still say that it was definitely the right call, there's definitely times as the years have passed by where I've gone, why did you do that? You could still be doing this. But yourself, you look back on everything with rose tinted glasses after the passage of time. And I think it was definitely the right decision for me.
Yeah. And like, you mentioned the injuries and that, and for sure, but like, you weren't worried about, say, money. Like, I know it's a big thing with people with contracts, or like you're obviously, you're playing professionally, you're earning decent money, and you had enough that was like, I'm just going to step away and do this other thing. That wasn't kind of pulling you in or keeping you there? Or
I guess I wouldn't say I was lucky, but I was in a situation that meant that finances or financial obligations were less of a thing for me. So there was just my wife and I. We have no kids at the moment, so I guess I had the luxury of stepping away from it and not having, I know guys that retired around the same time who had 3 kids and a big mortgage, that kind of thing. And certainly with that, there's an added pressure, I guess, to keep playing if you're in that position. So just with the timing of things, the fact that, again, I was young to be retiring, I had less of those, how would I put it? Less of those adult responsibilities, I suppose, as a 28-year-old, which gave me the freedom to step away from it without worrying about being in a panic or like having to find work immediately or having to get on the ladder to earning X amount of money in a specific period of time. I had, I didn't make buckets of money playing rugby, but like you said, I was reasonably well paid for a few years. I didn't do it for terribly long, but I had a little bit of a cushion, which allowed me to do that. And I was kind of fortunate in that respect, because I guess a lot of guys do either find themselves obliged to keep trying to play if they're not feeling it because of that obligation, or if they do decide to step away from it, they're doing so while taking on the burden of that stress of having to provide financially for those around them. So I managed to avoid that. So I was lucky in that respect.
And you mentioned then going back to study and moving to Brussels. And so chat to me about, like what kind of pulled you away? Some people, you hear of people retiring that they've no other options, or that's why they keep playing, because it's like, what else will I do? But you obviously kind of thought, I wouldn't mind doing this and this. And so chat to me about what that was and how you found it.
Yeah, sure. So I guess like I've always liked to travel, and always would have been someone that liked to travel to unusual places, we'll say. But even at that, when I was very settled in Munster and I was settled in Limerick, I was saying to myself, you know what, I'm going to be happy to stay here for good. See out my career in Munster, which I thought was going to last much longer than it did. And then, just stay put afterwards. And that was the plan. And moving to France happened all of a sudden. I went over mid-season. I was gone, I think it was a week and a half after having an initial conversation with one of the coaches at Grenoble. So it all happened in a hurry. So it was very much no time to dwell on it, just drop everything and go. And while I found it very difficult in that initial period, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it just opened my horizons, I guess, and gave me a different perspective on the world and made me see that, you can move to a new place where you don't know anyone, where you don't really speak the language at all, and still settle in, build a community around yourself, and have a really good time enjoying a new culture and enjoying meeting new people and seeing new things. So following my time in France, I was keen to just go and live somewhere else, basically. Not that there was anything wrong with staying put in Limerick. It was just, I just had an urge to kind of go out and see something else. And I would say a part of that was not wanting to be too close to the rugby scene, or Limerick's a small place. And I'd still be good pals with quite a few of the lads that are still playing. So invariably there would be that kind of awkwardness of kind of being close to the circle, but not being really in the circle. Do you go and watch games and kind of have those awkward conversations with people about what you're doing now that you're not playing for Munster anymore? All of that kind of stuff kind of pointed me in the direction of just going away and seeing something else. And I guess why we went to Brussels specifically was that I wanted to get into working in something in the political sphere. I've always been interested in politics, and that was something that I wanted to pursue after rugby, and was always interested in European politics. And there's buckets of opportunity for people that want to go and pursue that in Brussels. So that was the decision, really. And again, it was kind of a little bit of a whim. I kind of, suggested it to Sorka, and she was up for it. So we didn't put too much thought into it. We just went for it, and spent a little over 2 years there. And it was a great experience. But we weren't going to stay there long term. I guess we decided, didn't want to go back to Ireland just yet. So here I am now in Vancouver, and enjoying it a lot. And I think I think had I not had that experience in France, I probably just would have stayed put in Limerick. Even if things had run their course at Munster, I probably would have ended up staying there. And while there is nothing wrong with that at all, I think I would have missed out on a lot of the experiences that I've gotten to have in the last almost 4 years that I've had since finishing up.
Cool. And did I see, was it when you were in Brussels that you're involved in something, the European Commission?
Yeah, that's right. So I spent a year working in the private sector, and just over a year working for the European Commission. So I was doing communications for the Department of Agriculture there. So I guess a lot of people who move to Brussels, they do so with the view to working in one of the big institutions at a certain point or another. So it was cool to have been able to do that. But not the most exciting work, I would say. So I was happy to have dipped my toe in and then pull it back out. Probably not a specific type of role that I would go back into again. I was the web editor for the Department of Agriculture, so was basically in charge of kind of everything that went out online. So a lot of writing content, a lot of editing content, some stuff that was very interesting, very time sensitive. A lot of stuff about the invasion of Ukraine, for example, when all that kicked off, because of the knock-on effects on food security and that kind of thing. But the majority of it was fairly mundane, I would say. So glad to have seen it, and to have ticked the box off, but also glad to know that it's not something I'd probably jump back into.
Yeah, and is that for politics as a whole, or just that kind of area?
I suppose domestic politics, international politics, I've always kind of been interested in current affairs, I would say. So I always had it in my head that I definitely wanted to work in something to do with communications, because I always enjoyed doing media work. I liked the writing that I did for the Examiner while I was playing. So It seemed like a natural shift for someone with an interest in politics and kind of with a bit of experience doing various types of communication work. So that was probably to my detriment, to be honest, because I suppose a lot of people finish up and they have no idea what they want to do. And they're kind of forced to go through that process of, what do they want out of a job? What kind of sector do they want to work in? What kind of work-life balance do they want? They kind of have to drill down into it a little bit more. Whereas I probably skipped that part of it, which was a mistake, because I was like, I definitely want to work in this kind of specific job, but I didn't have a proper appreciation of what that would probably involve. So having worked in, I guess, communications of a political or a policy nature for 2.5 years, I was like, you know what, I'm not actually that keen on doing that anymore. So I'm working in medical device sales here now in Vancouver, which is a complete departure from what I was doing previously. But having done a lot more of that, I guess, holistic self-reflection of what do I want out of a job? What do I want my day to look like? Do I want to be working with people? All of that kind of stuff. What will suit my character as kind of a natural extrovert that loves feeding off other people's energy. That kind of pushed me towards something like sales, and I'm lucky to have ended up in medical device sales here. Whereas I neglected to go through that process when I was coming to the end of my playing career. So I found particularly the stuff in the commission, it was like I was working in a small team. There was very little interaction with other people. It was a remote role. I was on maybe 1 or 2 calls a day at a push, as opposed to, something that like would have replicated the rugby environment a little bit more, where you're just surrounded by people all day and like you're interacting with people all day. You're communicating on the pitch, off the pitch. It's all about building relationships and managing relationships. So while I didn't particularly enjoy that last job, it was definitely useful in terms of giving me a steer on what I actually wanted out of a career going forward.
Yeah. And you mentioned self-reflection and kind of like understanding, what suits you best or how you'll be at your best or what you'll enjoy most. Did you do much of that during your career, or was that something that was like done in, say, Munster or Grenoble for the short period? Like how you can be your best self, or how you plan, like you mentioned, planning your day and all that other stuff, which is all very important into feeling your best and being your best. Was there stuff like that in the setups, or?
There was a certain element of that. You would do all the kind of box ticky, like, goal setting stuff. What do we want out of this environment? What kind of people do we want to be? You would have all that stuff at the start of every season, but often one season just blended into another, and it was just rephrasing stuff that had been said 12 months previously, which is totally understandable. I mean, there's only like you can't reinvent the wheel when it comes to professional sport. Things have to be done in a certain way. I would say that, we got to do some interesting stuff like personality profiling in Munster, for example. We did that a couple of times. And that was quite insightful in the sense that it gave you, it's like, I guess it was called an insights profile, which is kind of like a version of, there are a dozen versions of them, but it's basically like a personality test that gives you an indication as to what your profile is, how you respond best to instruction, how you respond best to others interacting with you, how you get the most out of the people around you, that kind of stuff, which is very important and was a big eye opener, really. And the most insightful part of that exercise was seeing where other people sat on the scale, because that did give a clear indication as to, okay, maybe that's why he doesn't respond terribly well to coaches when they roar at them, or maybe this is why he responds well when coaches do roar at him and make an example of him and give him a kick up the ass. And those couple of times we did that was very useful for me throughout my career, because it was the same in France. Like I guess culturally, rugby, professional rugby, at least in Ireland, is very homogenous. It's bulk of guys are middle class white Irish guys, and that's totally fine. But you go to somewhere like France, and there's a far bigger cross section of society there. You got people from various backgrounds from France. You would have like a significant number of people who've come from immigrant communities to France. Then, in Grenoble, we had a huge contingent of Pacific Islanders. both guys who had actually grown up on the islands and then moved directly to France, or guys who had moved to New Zealand and then to France, or guys of Pacific heritage who were born and bred in Australia or New Zealand, but still very attached to their family's culture. So you had this big like clash of cultures, and it was always something I went back to, that kind of what I learned doing that insights profiling, because you could see it quite clearly. Like certain guys were quite, imposing physically, but quite fragile when it came to how they reacted to criticism. And the coach saying the exact same thing to 5 different people in that room would elicit a completely different response, largely based on what kind of background they had, and that was quite interesting to see. But there was guys that had really tough lives. Like there was one of my good pals, Hans, was from the Congo, and he'd immigrated to France from the Congo when he was 11, and he had lost his mother like a few years later. So it was just like him, his brother, and a couple of cousins, and that was it. That was his family network in France. And then you had guys, guys like me who'd come from, kind of a silver spoon kind of background, I guess, having gone to private school and having come through the academy at, one of the most polished rugby clubs, certainly in Europe, if not the world. So you had everything in between that, and it was really interesting. So yeah, I guess we didn't do a huge amount of it, that kind of stuff, that kind of reflection, but the little parts that we did definitely stayed with me throughout the time that I was playing, and still would today to an extent.
Cool. Yeah, the different backgrounds and the diversity is cool. I like that. When I went to the States and then Vancouver and then here, you just started seeing it more and more, whereas something growing up in Ireland, we're all we're for the large extent all the same. But was there anything that they did in Grenoble to help bring you together, or
not probably, I mean, nothing, I guess, because it's kind of standard in France, like that you would have that big clash. So like you've got it's less now, but you up to around that time when things started getting stricter with the number of non-GIF players or non-French players you could have in a squad, you kind of had a 50-50 split in most clubs. So foreigners and French guys. So it was automatically a divide there. But like you would gravitate naturally towards whatever your group was. And if you could speak French, then you could kind of jump between the two groups, which is what I was ultimately able to do, which was great, despite that being a nightmare for the first 6 months, because there was loads of me just turning up to meals and nodding my head like an idiot and hoping nobody asked me any questions and not understanding a word people were saying. But ultimately that 6 months of graft stood to me, and about 9 months in, then I was really comfortable just hanging around with the French guys as well, which was great. So I got to see both sides of it. So you would naturally gravitate to one or the other, but then within that, you had the Pacific Island contingent, which was quite different to the South African contingent or the Aussie contingent. There were very, I guess, stark differences between the groups. I guess the subgroups of each of the main groups, and similarly, in amongst the French guys, you had local guys, guys from the south of France. You had guys from like French Polynesia who kind of got lost in the middle a little bit, because they very much considered themselves Pacific Islanders because they are, but they didn't really speak much English. So they didn't consider themselves French. They associated themselves definitely more with the foreign contingent, but weren't able to socialize as well with us as they could with the French guys. So we had all these really interesting dynamics going on. And I guess, like, as I said to you previously, or as I alluded to previously, that time in France, and specifically that experience of being in an organization where there was, I think, 17 different nationalities, that really cemented my desire to go and just see as much of the world as I can, and kind of live in different places and immerse myself in, I guess, different cultures to what we get back home. Because yeah, as you say, we're pretty vanilla for the most part at home, and I would say rugby is probably the most vanilla of those big team sports at home as well. So yeah, it's been cool.
100%. And sorry, I'm pretty ignorant here, but the French Polynesians, I know there's a good few in the national team, but so they speak French, is it?
Yeah, so they would have their local dialect, but I guess their kind of common language would be French. the way the common language in certain parts, or the common language in certain English speaking islands would be English. So in places like Tahiti, we had the first professional rugby player from Tahiti. He's currently playing with Bayonne. We had guys from Wallis and Futuna. There was a couple of guys from New Caledonia, and they're native French speakers because it's what they grow up speaking in schools. I guess it's just due to colonization, really. So they learn French the way we learn English, and other countries learn English. And that was kind of one of the most interesting things, because honestly, I had heard of Tahiti, didn't know anything about it, but I had never heard of Wallis and Futuna. And my first year there, we had 3 academy guys who were from Wallis and Futuna. And, it was, I didn't know that place existed, let alone had I met or known anyone from that part of the world. So it was a big eye opener. Like, I remember going home and like opening up my maps and going, where are these places? And just seeing how tiny they are and how isolated they are geographically. And then hearing the stories about how guys would have come from these places in the middle of nowhere, like really in the greater scheme of things, and had made their way to France to pursue the dream of playing rugby. It was there was a lot of really inspirational stuff, as you can imagine.
100%, yeah. And switching a little bit, but something that I've found and heard with coaches, that like you look at the coaches that you had that were good and you kind of copy some of the stuff they did. That's what I did, and what I've heard other people do too. But what, you don't say names, but what like have good coach, what's a good coach to you, or what would you take from coaches you've had now that you're doing it yourself?
Yeah, 100%. And you're dead right. I mean, virtually everything I try to replicate is either taken from like Razzie Erasmus and Jack Nienenbar, or it's like line out specific stuff, because I'm mainly doing set piece stuff with the rowers now. So Munster we were blessed. We had some of the best line out callers in the world, excellent line out coaches the whole time I was there. So it was always a very well-oiled machine. So yeah, 100% picking and choosing from what I know, I guess, because I haven't done any coaching courses or anything like that. So I am just drawing on my experience as a player. I guess in terms of why I would value like Razzie and Jacques stuff so much, like obviously they're World Cup winning coaches. So I mean, it's kind of obvious that, what they did would be a good lead to follow. But what I enjoyed about working with them or under them so much was how simple everything was. Like just the beauty and the simplicity of what they were doing. Really simple messages, like almost like foolproof. You'd almost describe it as like almost impossible to get wrong. Certain elements were more technical than others, but in terms of just the general approach to philosophy and the general approach to drills and everything else, like it was really basic elementary stuff done with intensity and done with intent. And like I think the guys maybe sometimes roll their eyes a little bit at some of the stuff that I've done over the last few weeks, because it's really stuff that you would see an under 12 side do, but it's literally stuff that World Cup winning coaches still do with their World Cup winning sides. So yeah, I think that's the big thing for me. And one of the other coaches asked me, what do you think makes a good coach, a few weeks ago after I arrived? And I said, yeah, being able to like communicate really clearly, to have a really simple philosophy, and ultimately to be able to get the lads up when you need to get them up, and get them switched on and ready for battle. And there are 3 quite simple things in theory, but to be able to do them all, and to be able to do them all together is surprisingly rare, I would say, in rugby, even in professional rugby. And it was kind of seeing the 2 of them in action, how well they bounced off each other, and how well they took like the mysticism out of it and made it like really, really easy to understand, and made the instructions really, really easy to follow. That's something that I think I would certainly try or like to replicate as a coach, particularly at club level. And I'm sure you found this as well, is like, I guess coaching at a high level, or coaching at a team like Lansdowne at home, who have aspirations of winning an All-Ireland league. That's almost easier to an extent in terms of how broad the playing group is. So you know that you're working with guys who, let's say at professional level, are there to make a living, are there to sustain a livelihood. They have to work hard if they have any ambition of doing this for a long period of time. Similarly, at like an elite amateur club, you're working with guys who want to win silverware at the end of the year, who want to be competitive. So they know that they can't get away with not doing the work. Whereas you drop down a little bit and you've got guys who want to improve as much as they can, get the most out of themselves and perform well every week. But you've also got guys who like don't have much interest in training, are just there to do something social, turn up and play a game of ball at the weekend and go on the piss afterwards. And that's perfectly fine. I was that guy in Belgium. But from a coach's point of view, it's obviously a much more difficult ship to navigate, because you have to keep everyone interested. If you go too hard and you make life miserable for the guys that are there to have fun, the guys stop having fun and then they won't turn up. But equally, if you kind of cool the jets too much and you don't make it meaningful for the guys that want to push themselves and get a lot out of it, then equally it kind of becomes a useless exercise for them, and they start to go, well, what's the point of me being here? So that balancing act is a really interesting one, and I definitely have a huge amount of admiration for people that have been able to do that at club level over the years. So that's something definitely to bear in mind.
Yeah, 100%. Great point to make. And it's something that's very important for coaches, I've found as well, is to understand your players. And I've seen this disconnect at club levels or whatever, where a coach is mad keen on winning. And they're like, look, they're on a coaching course that was ran by a professional coach talking about this, that, the other, and they're talking about implementing XYZ that Munster or Leinster or whatever South Africa are implementing, and then they're getting frustrated when your man rocks up 10 minutes late and whatever, and they're what's the story here? This isn't good enough. It's like, but like you say, it's like, he doesn't really care. He wants to get away from the missus and he wants to go and have a run around with the lads and have a few pints after on a Thursday.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly, man. And like my experience in Belgium was really good from that point of view, because it was, like I said, it was third division in Belgium, and like there's loads of like buckets of really good talent there. But it's it's kind of it's seen as a social club. It's the club that all the most of the foreigners who want to play rugby in Brussels, or most of the English speakers, would play with in Brussels. And it was, I guess, to go from my last experience having been professional rugby, albeit professional rugby in France, which is still has one foot in the amateur era, certainly it kind of, once you get out of that top 6, 7, top 14 clubs, to go from that to something that was like almost purely social. The guys were there, wanted to win, but ultimately, a message went out at the start of the week, and it was like, who's available this weekend? And if you were available, okay, grand, let's try and build a team around who's available. But if you weren't available, there was no picking up the phone going, oh, come on, like, what are you doing booking a long weekend away this weekend? This is a big game. It was very much like, whoever's there is there, and whoever's not there is not there, and we'll just deal with what we have on the go. So obviously a nightmare from a coach's point of view, because they're like trying to fight fires and cobble together, a seconds team every weekend, more or less. But it was really refreshing, I guess. And I'm glad that was my first experience of rugby after the pro game, because I guess, and it sounds a little bit cliche, but ultimately, like, any of us, the reason any of us started playing in rugby, or playing rugby in the first place, or getting involved in rugby in the first place, is to have fun. We were kids. We did it because it was something we enjoyed doing. It was a social thing. It was something that you got a kick out of. And sorry, apologies, Ryan.
Oh, good.
So it was something you got a kick out of. And you can kind of lose sight of that when it becomes your job, like anything, I guess. A job is a job at the end of the day. And if you're in that system, you do forget the initial reasons that you went into it or developed an interest in it. So it was great for me to see that in Belgium and be reminded of the fact that actually, people are just here to have fun. And like, yeah, we can take it seriously and we can work hard and everything else. But ultimately, we're going we have a game on Sunday, and we're all going for a few pints on Friday night after training, and it was great. So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, and certainly as a coach now in particular, it's something that I'm very conscious of, like that balancing act and making sure everyone's, or as close to everyone, is getting what they want out of their experience.
Yeah. And it's something, yeah, like we're chatting about, but a skill that coaches have to have, or look at their team. And like another one, just thinking off the top of my head is, you know, thinking 4 phases ahead. Whereas when you're coaching a club, there could well be a knock on within those 4 phases, or, you know, like you have to just look at your team. And you know, once again, I was, you know, talking to under 14, under 16 coaches, all these different levels, and it's, what's on TV is nearly a different sport to what you're doing. You know, you don't need to be, the All Blacks are doing this or Ireland are doing this. It's like, it's nearly a different sport.
Yeah, 100%. You're dead right. It's almost like the difference between 15s and sevens, almost like at a professional level. They're different sports essentially. And while you can pick and choose bits and pieces from it, I think, yeah, where a lot of people fall down is seeing something and insisting that that has to be replicated at club level, regardless of what that level is. You know, obviously, as I said, I made the Lansdowne reference. You know, you could probably take most of what Leinster do and replicate it in Lansdowne, and it'll be done properly. Whereas, you know, you drop down to like a Division 2A or a 2B team, then you're going to have more difficulty doing that. And I think a lot of guys probably get frustrated when they try and implement stuff at that level, thinking that it's the secret sauce, and realizing that it's, you know, it's just too convoluted, or it's not applicable, or it's not appropriate, or whatever it might be. And actually, one example that I would have always had, you know, when I was starting off playing with Shannon, or like right through my career with Shannon, you would be asked to like go and do a bit of throwing with like a young hooker, like a 15, 16-year-old in one of the schools, or a guy that was playing underage at one of the clubs. Always enjoyed doing it, but a lot of times you would see guys basically, you know, get into a squat position and put the ball behind their head and their chin would be tucked into their chest, and basically the kind of like the old school kind of Jerry Flannery setup, I guess. And they'd be throwing pretty terribly, and I'd go, well, why are you throwing this way? And they'd say, well, such and such, whoever the coach was told me that I had to throw this way because this is how you throw. And I would kind of have to like unravel that and explain to them that, you know, this, like, ultimately what matters is you getting the ball to the target, and there are certain fundamentals that have to be consistent across the board, whatever way you set up and whatever way you throw. Stuff like finishing your hands, you know, stuff like using your hips to generate momentum, not being too upright when you set up. All of that kind of stuff is important, and has to be applied regardless of what way you set up. But you can set up whatever way you want as long as you feel comfortable with it, and you need to play around with how you set up to find what your groove is. Like, I guess one of my strong features of my game, certainly when I was at Munster, was the fact that I was an excellent thrower of the ball. But like the amount of meandering along that I did throughout my time in the academy, right into my first year as a contracted pro, like was mad when I look back at it. The amount of things that I tried, the inconsistency that I had, and I probably only found my groove with my throwing, I'd say, like 12 weeks maybe before I actually made my Munster debut. So like I started my first like development contract in July 2013. I made my debut in December 2013. And it was probably only around like August, September, I would say, that I got really comfortable with what became my technique. But like right up until being nearly 23 years of age, I was still fiddling around with it because I couldn't quite get it to click. So that's something that young guys, I think, have some difficulty figuring out. Or even in Belgium as well, like I would have done plenty of work with the throwers there, and you've varying levels, like certain guys that have thrown for 10 years, other guys who started playing rugby 6 months ago and are just learning it for the first time. And I think people think that you have to do something in a certain way, and same thing applies, I'm sure, in your experience, to like kicking, to nines, passing. Everyone thinks that they have to do it a certain way, that the best players in the world do it. And sure, while there are fundamental elements that have to be the same regardless of what way you do it, I think people have a lot more leeway to play around with stuff than they realize. And I think that's something that coaches can lose sight of a bit as well.
100%, brilliant point. And yeah, definitely. And something I found, I think, helps is and sometimes players don't want this. Sometimes players want to be told, like you say, like if you go down and it's like, this guy has played professional rugby, he tell me how to do it. Just tell me what to do, and then I'll do it. But what I've found, can help players is they just do reps, and when you do one that feels good and that works out, think about how it felt and try and replicate that feeling, so like if the analogy of when I was younger going out kicking balls, like I just kick a million balls, and then you just start to get the feel of a good one, oh, that felt good, what did I do there, oh, and just you keep trying to replicate the good feel, and then all of a sudden you get to somewhere. And it'd be the same with a 9-passing or a hooker throwing, you know what I mean? But there's a lot of trial and error, and maybe it is a cop out. I don't think it is from a coaching point of view. Like you say, there's a few simple things you can say, like cues, but often as well, it's unraveling stuff. Just relax, player, and just have a crack. And then when one or two work out, it's like, oh, how did that feel? What did I do? And then kind of build from there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point as well. And it applies very strongly to throwing. And Ian Costello, who's now head of the academy at Munster and was previously, at Wasps, and I last would have worked with him when he was defence coach at Munster a few years back. But Cosy was like, he was kind of like the universal coach, in that even if he didn't have an expertise in it from his own time playing or his time coaching up to that, he would go and just nerd it up, like about, okay, how do people get better at throwing? And Kazi worked very closely with the hookers that first year that I had as a pro in Munster, and would have worked with me as well when I was through the academy. And he was an excellent throwing coach, because like that, he was very big on feel and like sensation. So like that, and like I was saying, like certain things that had to be consistent, but it was like finding your way to get it all right, to get it to come together. And he spent hours and hours with us, and I would owe him a great deal of gratitude for kind of molding me into a very solid line-out thrower. But like that, he kind of didn't have any preconceptions, because he wasn't a hooker himself, or he wasn't a forward himself when he played, and he hadn't coached forwards, aside from being like a head coach of a club. So he was kind of wise enough to go, well, like, I can't tell them to throw this way, because I don't know what it's like to throw that way. So they have to figure it out for themselves. And that was a huge help, and definitely feel is a big part of getting things right as a hooker, because I guess I am being biased. I would say that like line-out throwing is one of the most difficult skills to get right in rugby, because the margin of error is so small and there are so many variables. Like, you can't see your target when you're throwing the ball. You have to get the timing perfect. You're relying on everything else going right as well. Movement on the ground, the lift, the jump, the receipt of the ball, everything has to go right. And if you deviate slightly from the kind of perfect plane, the results can be disastrous. You overthrow the ball, you throw it crooked, you throw it low and it gets robbed, whatever it might be. And the margin for error is tiny. So like, feeling what a good rep like is crucial to getting it right. So yeah, like feel is huge for sure.
And once you got your thrown down, say you're 25 years of age and you're really comfortable and you feel good, and anyway, you've having good games, what are some things that you found were very important to lineouts going well?
So you mean in terms of preparation, or the actual execution?
Yeah, just I suppose I'm thinking from, I was a caller, and out of my own thoughts, on what I think was important. But what did you feel? Just say, I don't know, you're in the Munster team 4 weeks in a row, and what are the kind of things that were key for, you hit 8 out of 8. Why did you hit 8? Why did you get 8 out of 8 last week?
Sure. So I think, as I said, and as people know, the Munster lineout has generally been a fairly well-oiled machine, for as long as they've been playing professional rugby, I would say, and certainly from the mid 2000s onwards, always has been considered a strong lineout internationally. And I think a big part of that is the fact that it's actually such a simple system, and it's not convoluted at all. So it relies heavily on pace. So beating your opponents on the ground, fast balls, and obviously it relies on a huge amount of work on the opposition in the lead up to a game. But from my point of view, I was lucky that my time in Munster overlapped with Paul O'Connell's time at Munster as well. So the line-out culture was really good there. But a lot of people are surprised when I say that, in weeks that Paulie was back around, like the lineup menus were so tight, like really short menus. There might have been a dozen, maybe 15 options, really heavily reliant on buzz calls, just like get out of jail calls if they were on. So he was a big believer, and Axel was the same. Axel was a great lineout operator and was a big believer in just taking the low-hanging fruit and not overcomplicating something for the sake of it. And that's something that I struggled with when I went to France, is just the sheer volume of different calls in the lineup menu. So that was something that I found it hard to get my head around, because ultimately what made me confident going into a game at the weekend was the fact that, right, I've nailed multiple reps of each of these options. Then I've gone into the court and I've, spent 2-3 hours over the course of the week doing really good quality work. And I know exactly what these throws need to feel like, how fast they need to go, when I need to release them, all of that jazz. And it's no coincidence that when I was going into games with that level of certainty, that the lineout generally functioned very well, and I didn't have too many bad days at the office. But if you're going into a game where you have like 35 different options that can be called, you may be throwing something on the day that you haven't thrown at all during the week. You mightn't even have thrown it in the last couple of weeks, and you're kind of doing guesswork on the go. You're thinking, right, when should I let this go? How fast, how early, what height do I need to let this go at? Who do I need to wait for? How quickly is he going to move on the ground? How high is he going to jump? All of that kind of stuff is stuff that at Munster you just didn't have to worry about, because you knew exactly how things were going to look because of that tight menu. And it kind of comes back to my earlier point about Razzie and Jacques. It was just like beauty and simplicity, and the confidence to know that you don't need to have, don't need to have like 3 dozen options or three dozen lineout options going into a game at the weekend if you are confident enough that you can execute the dozen that you have better than the opposition can defend them. And I think that's what made, and probably does continue to make, the lineout at Munster work very well. There was always like a consistency in the calling system and the setups throughout the time that I was there, regardless of the personnel. It was like it had kind of been the same for the last decade, really, and it just led on from one person to another. And obviously it helps when you're at a club that so many guys graduate from the academy, so they just know the system from 18 years of age, and they just get better and better at delivering it. And obviously that's a luxury that a lot of other clubs don't have. But yeah, again, nothing too complicated. I would say just simplicity and like intentful practice during the week. They were the things that I think made the lineup run well when I was there.
Yeah, 100%. The simplicity, Lanley, I come back to, is just so important. And it's something I found calling lineouts and coaching lineouts. And like towards the end, I would just bring everyone into a huddle, say we're doing a red X, whatever that is. And then we just, when I shout go, we do it. So everyone in huddle, this is what we're doing. We walk in, I shout go, we do it. And then you'd have people saying, oh, well, would you not shout some random numbers and some random stuff? I'm like, no. And like, why not call in there? So then you have extra options or whatever. This is when I'm coaching more. So I'm like, no. And you'll have guys who'll go in and start doing this mad shit, and you're just confusing yourselves. And like you say, if you have a 5-man with 4 options, if you don't win, it's because of you. You see, the pro game, they often will load the front, and then they'll throw 5 meters out from the line, they'll throw it up. They're telling the opposition, hey, we're going up at the front, but we're going to beat you for speed. And 9.9 times out of 10, they win it. So they're literally saying, this is our call, and you're coming up with me, and we're both going to do this, but our timing's going to be better. We've repped this, and we're just going to win it. So like, it's nearly, if you don't win it, it's nearly always because of you, unless if you're doing a 7-man and you're trying to get the back to get width on the field or something like that.
Yeah, totally. I agree. Like, yeah, going in with a pre-call and having like your 2 or 3 additional, just like, I guess, bailout options, like, one at the front, one at the middle, one at the back. Like, honestly, I don't see a need for more options than that in a lineout. But particularly in France, like, trying to convince guys of that was a difficult conversation, because they we're used to working at teams where, you know, like they were calling in the line out, and that kind of sounds good in theory, but ultimately you've guys now having to remember all 15 calls that they're supposed to remember on that setup, and then like recognizing what the right one is, or remembering who the trigger is, and then just not getting it wrong, basically. So yeah, like you say, the amount of uncertainty that adds to the equation, as opposed to just saying, yeah, this is the call, this is what we'll do. If we can't do this, or if I decide this isn't on as a caller, then we'll do one of these three options. But this is all you need to worry about when we go in here. I think, yeah, like the simplicity, it just gives you the luxury of taking so many variables out of the equation.
100%. And one thing, just from a club point of view, is like when I was playing in Vancouver before I left, I found, I suppose, yeah, even up to the provincial level, but you go into the pre-call, I would just tell them, hey, you're lifting him from the front, you're going to bounce back there and you're going to do this, and then I'm going up. And you make the call, just tell the 4 or 5 people what they're doing, and then you just walk in. Because I found, like, you know, that's just easy. Just tell everyone what to do, you do it, it's done. Whereas, like I said, one person half knows their call, then it's fucked.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And like, to be honest, so I've kind of like, I've been introducing the Munster stuff at the rowers slowly. And to be honest, I probably did it too slowly to begin with. And I was like, look, I don't want to dump a completely new calling system on them. I'm coming in halfway through the season. I want to try and preserve a little bit of what's there, even though they were having a lot of difficulty with their line out in the first half of the season. So I was kind of gradually introducing stuff. So they were like, we're kind of caught in the middle almost, in that I was trying to hold on to some old stuff while introducing new stuff, and it wasn't working out. Whereas ultimately last weekend, I was just like, right, we're binning this, and this is what we'll do. And I'm going to throw a load of stuff at you, and we'll see how we get on. And like, they've like received it very well and reacted to it very well. And it worked very well last weekend as well. So I guess the apprehension that you have with something technical like the line out is that, you know, it is what I did at Munster, at a team like Munster, going to be replicable like at club level in Vancouver. And like you know, maybe it can be across the board, and maybe it can't be in a lot of places, but I was kind of a bit apprehensive about throwing it all at them, but like, it's actually gone really well. So I'm quite impressed with it, because I'm being very lazy. Like, I'm literally taking the exact same calling system, exact same movements, and just going, look, this works, you know, 5 levels above where you're playing at now. So just like, let's go for it. And yeah, it seems to be working well. But yeah, like that, I guess the difficulty is if a guy misses training on a Tuesday or a Thursday, it kind of, you know, it kind of renders a new option null and void at the weekend if he ends up playing, because like, you can call it, but he's going to fuck it up, and then it just becomes a mess. So yeah, maybe that's something we could look at doing for guys that maybe missed a Tuesday or a Thursday. Just tell the guy calling the lineouts to point exactly where he needs to go beforehand, and that might take some of it out of the equation.
Yeah, give him a hand. Hey, cheers for your time. One last one. What was, looking back, say, the best thing and the worst thing about playing pro rugby?
Well, good question. Yeah, it's usually like best memory and worst memory, but yeah, that's a more holistic view of it. I would say the best thing about, I mean, without a doubt, the best thing about playing pro rugby is the fact that you're a pro rugby player, the fact that you're doing something that you dreamed of doing. You know, I don't think there's a young boy anywhere in the world that kind of has an interest in sport that doesn't dream of playing whatever sport he loves at some point for a living. Be that, you know, cricket, basketball, rugby, soccer, whatever it is. So to have gotten to do that is definitely something I look back on being the best thing about it. But I guess that's a little bit of a cop out, because it's like, not really, it's not anything tangible or measurable. I would say the best part of it, to be honest, is how fun it is, really. Like, and I would kind of qualify that with saying how fun it is when things aren't going really badly for you at an individual level. Like, it's brilliant. You know, you're doing something you enjoy. You're like you're in an environment with people you're so close to, particularly in an Irish club, because you've come through the academy with loads of these guys. You've played underage with them, so you might like. I started playing with Simon Zebo, Paddy Butler, Dave O'Callaghan when we were all 16. So to have come from the age of 16 and be playing European Cup rugby with guys like that it's special. And I think the fact that you're close to the people you're around makes it that extra bit special. You're being paid to keep fit for a living and like all of that stuff, and you're in peak physical condition, even though you mightn't realize it at the time. I probably only realized how good a condition I was in as the years go on afterwards. So I think, it's like the fact that you're living your dream and how enjoyable it is, like when it's going well. I think they're the two things that I would look back on the most. I mean, playing in the big stadiums and all that jazz is great and all, but if that's not every week and it's not every day. Whereas every day is you rocking into training and having a slag, having a joke, having crack with the people around you and getting paid to do it. And I think there's very few jobs in the world that you can get to take that much fun out of your environment while being paid, like pretty well to do it. Then to, I guess, like kind of other side of the same coin would be the worst part of it is how quickly like the knees can just get cut from under you. So I guess like from my point of view, I had quite a quick ascent to European Cup rugby, I guess, from the point where I signed my first pro contract. Like I wasn't outrageously young or anything, but I was playing week in, week out at the age of 23. I just turned 23. And I had like a fairly quick ascent to, I guess, the top of club professional rugby. And then it was just like, it was gone all of a sudden. And even though I was still the same athlete and I was still the same player, ultimately you're only as good as your last game. And if you get like two bad injuries, more or less back to back, which is what I got, psychologically it's torturous. Like it's very, very difficult to bounce back from that and to go from being first choice to being fifth choice in the pecking order and being told that you're not going to be on the bench for the British and Irish Cup because all five of the hookers are fit and you're fifth in line at the moment. Like it's tough to go from playing in front of a like full Thomond Park or a full Aviva Stadium and wearing the number 2 jersey to not getting on the plane to go to Moseley on like a wet October to play in front of 250 people, like not being considered good enough to do that in that given week is tough. And to be honest, I probably never recovered from that. Definitely at Munster, and while I had a bit of a resurgence in France and it went pretty well initially, I think that was always kind of hanging over me. It was like that anxiety about the insecurity of it and how prone I was to injury and how close I would be to just like being out of a job again. That was definitely something I didn't enjoy. But like that's the fact of the matter, and that's the life of a professional athlete, and I guess more specifically a pro rugby player. So you can't have it both ways. You have to take the good with the bad, and while it takes a bit of time to work through it, you just have to accept that that's part of your life, really. So that they'd be my best and worst elements, I think.
Brilliant. Well, thanks, Mil, for your time. Duncan, been unreal chatting.
Thanks for having me on, Brian. Delighted we got to chat eventually after a couple of reschedules on my part. So enjoyed that conversation. So cheers.